Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to talk about how to counter Zeri, as she's been out for about a month now, and I feel like it's usually, I've got a good enough handle on what exactly this champion does that I feel like I can offer some good advice. Now, Zeri has absolutely made waves in her first month after release. She's immediately launched into the LEC as a pick-ban champion, and has certainly been difficult to deal with if she's in the right hands. Now, to be fair, she is receiving a boatload of nerfs on this week's patch, which should help curb some of her excesses. But I do expect her to continue to be a potent threat for quite some time, so hopefully this video is going to be useful for you guys in order to help counter this champion. Now, first, I do want to say a note here. Most of Zeri's power is accessible by players that play her a lot. She has a lot going on. She requires skill shot prowess to get the most out of. There's a lot of things that Zeri does that you really need to know the champion and play the champion well in order to actually get value out of her. Because of this, I can't recommend you insta-pick Zeri if she's available unless you play at higher echelons or play her a lot, because if you just try to play her, especially if you're not as experienced, you are not going to be able to do what this champion requires you to do, and you're going to feed regardless of how powerful Zeri supposedly is. So that is my note out of the way. Let's go ahead and talk about general counterplay for Zeri. First up, Zeri is exceptionally squishy, even for a marksman. I think she's in like the bottom 11 champions as far as base health goes, and her resistances are not much better. So this means that Zeri can be blown up quite quickly by champions that either can get into her range or otherwise hit her with targeted damage that she cannot avoid. Things like Victor Power Transfer or Anti-Disintegrate are good options or examples of this, because Zeri can't outplay that, right? Even if she has a lot of mobility and a lot of movement speed, if you hit her with damage, she just explodes. Now, she can mitigate this somewhat by building things like Trinity Force or Divine Sunderer to get that little bit of extra health, but she's still exceptionally squishy, so anything that can do consistent targeted bursts of damage is just going to absolutely annihilate Zeri, and it means that she's very reliant on her singular dash or movement speed in order to stay alive. Zeri's unique auto attack pattern also gives her a bunch of advantages, but it does come with some downsides that we can exploit in order to find an edge. First up, Zeri's auto attacks are skill shots. They're blockable by minions, towers, and even wards, which gives you some ability to avoid her damage outright. If you're fighting her in your minion wave, it really reduces her ability to hurt you, because even if she does have her piercing auto attacks from her E, they suffer fall off damage in that regard, so you're still going to be taking less damage overall. And if she doesn't have her E active, she literally can't hit you if there's a target between you and her. So keep this in mind, especially the ward trick. That is a bit of a desperation play. I wouldn't say this is something you should just be doing, but especially if you're trying to retreat back to your tower and you need to avoid one last auto attack or two, drop a ward. Zeri's auto attacks will automatically hit that. You can also shelter behind your tower, because Zeri's auto attacks are blocked by the tower. So if she's trying to dive you, keep a tower between yourself and her, and there's really nothing she can do about it. Zeri also has the disadvantage of being countered by unpredictable movement, right? Even though Burst Fire is technically an auto attack, it is still a skill shot, and if she's firing it from its full 825 range, you have maximum time to see it coming and to dodge it. This means that having unpredictable movement, as if you were playing against an Ezreal, for example, can really shut her down, because obviously against point-and-click marksman, that's irrelevant, right? Caitlyn can right-click you and do free damage, but Zeri can't do that. She has to hit shots, so keeping your movement unpredictable is a good way to at least help avoid her auto attack harass in lane. Finally, Zeri can auto-attack you if you're in a bush, but she does still have to respect the inability to see what you're doing. She doesn't know where you're moving, she doesn't know if you're still running away, if you're turning around, if you're channeling an ability, right? She can't see that. So even if she can still hit you for free while she can't see you, she has to respect the advantage that Fog of War gives you, so don't feel afraid to try and use Fog of War just because Zeri has skill shots and she can still throw them at you. You still have the option of using that to potentially turn around on her. Zeri right-click also does a surprising amount of damage if you're unprepared, but it forces her to step up to her base auto-attack range of 500 in order to use. This is exceptionally short. I want to say Vayne's auto-attack range is about 500 or 525, and almost everyone below that is like a melee champion. So if Zeri is in range to right-click you, she's probably also in range for most of your damage as well. So keep this in mind. If she's trying to use that, especially to harass with, you can just step back and sort of avoid it entirely, because she has to get really, really close to use it. The other thing to consider the right-click is that this is technically Zeri's Q, right? Zeri's Q and like Zeri's auto attacks are kind of flip-flopped. So Zeri right-click is more or less an ability. It's a core part of her damage pattern. It's a core part of her ability to set up shots for herself, because if you're slowed, she's going to be able to get more damage in. And in that regard, if Zeri is using her right click to pick up CS that otherwise she would miss, there is a period of time in which she's going to have to actually charge up her right click again in order to actually use it. And this is an opportunity that you can exploit in the same vein as a champion using a skill shot of theirs in order to make sure they don't miss minions, and then they have a cooldown available for you to exploit, right? You can think of that in a similar way as Zeri right click, so it is still something you can exploit. Zeri's W is very similar to Jinx Zap, so in a similar fashion to that, make sure you keep minions between yourself and Zeri, except when it hits terrain, and then it will penetrate through the terrain into the other side. Now, this also includes all terrain, including towers, so keep this in mind when you're recalling a low health, because Zeri may step up just to fire a W at it, so she can try and laser snipe you from behind your own tower. If Zeri fades into the river when she's pushed up as well, she may be looking to fire a laser through the wall at you to get some free damage, so again, keep this in mind if you're trying to avoid taking some free damage off of the Ultra Shock laser. Moving on to Zeri's dash. This does give her pass-through auto attacks, but the damage decreases for passing through units. I mentioned this before. The other thing is that even though Spark Surge has a small cooldown refund mechanic, it's not a full reset like Lucian can do after he gets Ionian Boots. If Lucian uses a full rotation with Ionian Boots, he is going to have Relentless Pursuit back in order to escape with. Zeri doesn't have this, though. Zeri can mostly decrease the cooldown on Spark Surge, but she doesn't have the ability of fully decreasing it. And this means that if she dashes aggressively, you can punish her because she doesn't have that mobility now in order to escape with afterwards. One of the other things that Zeri does is hang out by walls because her dash will carry her through the wall to the other side in order to have a basically free escape if a play actually happens. For this reason, if you're trying to gank a Zeri from multiple locations, make sure to always send someone to the other side of that wall, or to have a champion that can follow her through the wall, because she definitely will be looking to just Spark Surge all the way through it, and if someone's waiting for her on the other side, well, she's out of her mobility options from there. And speaking of mobility, even though Zeri's ultimate does have the potential of giving her a ton of movement speed, most of the value of Zeri's ultimate is backloaded. The movement speed has to stack up over time while Zeri lands shots, and the duration is limited by Zeri being able to continue landing shots. So if Zeri ults and you don't think you're going to be able to kill her, just back off. Like, Zeri might run after you and fire a couple more auto attacks, but if she's no longer able to hit champions, her ultimate will wear off, and after that point, she's just down her ultimate cooldown, and you can pick a fight with her for free after that point because she no longer has that ability to fight. If she does ult late into a fight as well, this is the kind of thing where you can make sure you're holding cooldowns for when you see Zeri ult, because if you're able to kill her before she has the opportunity to stack up movement speed, she loses a lot of the mobility and a lot of the potential damage she has in the middle of a fight. So you, again, have the ability of fighting her in that regard. The other thing to consider is that if you're team fighting against a Zeri, make sure to spread out to avoid letting Zeri's chain lightning from her ultimate get just absolutely massive AoE damage. Again, Zeri's auto attacks are body blockable, but if she's chaining lightning to your whole team, it's sort of irrelevant. So spread out and make sure you're not standing close enough to each other that Zeri's getting a ton of free damage off of landing the chain lightning attacks. Finally, I wouldn't worry excessively about enabling Zeri's passive. It's potent, but it's not altogether that exceptional because she only gets 60% of the shield's value post-mitigation, which means that any shield Zeri is stealing is not going to be very big outside of Zeri auto-attacking someone like a Set or a Tahm Kench after they've popped their various defensive abilities. So I wouldn't worry so much about saying, oh, well, I can't play Janna into Zeri because otherwise I enable her passive. Like, that's not very relevant. Mostly it's going to be enabled if Zeri's allies can give her shield, or if she can give herself a shield. So, and that's nothing you can do about, right? So I wouldn't worry about that too much. Moving on to counter pick recommendations. Now, I would avoid champions with either telegraphed abilities or slow-moving skill shots. A good Zeri will either stay at a far enough range to avoid them, or will have enough movement speed or her dash available in order to make dodging them trivial. Ezreal, for example, is a bad idea into Zeri. You are never going to hit anything on a Zeri. In a similar fashion, artillery mages like Vel'Koz or Ziggs are other bad decisions because, again, they have to hit shots, and it's really hard to do that against Zeri due to how fluid she is. For that matter, champions that taunt, like Rammus, don't do too much to Zeri because her right-click isn't an auto-attack, and therefore if you're really counting on the on-hit damage that you're reflecting, if you're someone like Rammus, or just having the character hit you a bunch, well, that's going to have a little bit less value because Zeri, again, just the unique way in which her auto-attacks work, she gets less screwed over by taunts. I would also generally avoid playing Juggernauts. This mostly goes if you're a top lane or jungle player, because Juggernauts are all going to be too slow to ever catch Zeri and too large to ever avoid getting hit with their shots. They're just going to be free ultimate farm for Zeri, and there's nothing you can do about that. The one possible exception is Nasus, since Wither's 95% slow is basically a stun against Zeri, and it disables her movement speed-based shenanigans. But, like, even in that situation, Zeri still has a dash and Nasus doesn't, which means he's at a disadvantage, especially if he's trying to wade through her team after her. So I would still generally avoid Juggernauts as a rule of thumb. But let's get on to some more specific counter picks here. I think the biggest one, and anyone who's watched the channel for a long enough time already knows I always say this, but Poppy is great. And legitimately, she's really good against a lot of things that Zeri wants to do. She can tackle Zeri into the very walls that Zeri wants to try and surf through. So if Zeri's doing her thing where she stands by a wall, well, Poppy can tackle her into that wall. Or if Zeri's trying to surf over a wall to set up a play, Poppy can tackle her into the wall. Kayn players know the exact pain that I'm talking about right now. Poppy can also block Zeri's dash entirely with a well-timed W, or she can force her ultimate onto cooldown with Poppy's own ultimate. If you hit her with the Keeper's Verdict right after Zeri ults, Zeri is not going to be able to get back to the fight fast enough in order for her ultimate to continue ticking. Now, this is a little bit harder because you have to ult Zeri early in a fight, or her movement speed will stack too high that you'll, just to the point where you can't reliably hit her with the Keeper's Verdict. But generally speaking, I still think Poppy does a lot that is really good into Zeri, and Poppy's relatively low damage is irrelevant because, as mentioned before, Zeri is fairly squishy. Speaking of Zeri being squishy, Talon is phenomenal into Zeri. He can follow her over the walls that she'll try to dash through in order to escape, and he can continue following her over more walls if she has even more mobility to burn. He also has a ton of targeted burst that she basically can't outplay. If you do something like Shadow Assault into the Noxian Diplomacy, into Rake, into the auto attack, it's a free passive proc, it's a free electrocute proc, and it's basically all targeted. There's literally nothing Zeri can do about anything that Talon wants to do to her, and I think that makes him a very good counter pick for that champion if you see her get played. In a similar fashion, Annie has a targeted stun and high damage, which means she counters Zeri for similar reasons as Talon. In the bot lane, Caitlyn can abuse Zeri by standing in her own minion wave and right-clicking Zeri to drain her health bar. Obviously, Zeri has a comparable attack range to Caitlyn, but if Caitlyn can right-click Zeri and Zeri can't burst fire Caitlyn, Caitlyn is going to win the auto-attack trade every single time. Caitlyn's traps also are of double use against Zeri because Zeri has to hit skill shots, right? She's constantly jockeying for position, moving around, trying to find a place in order to actually land shots, and Caitlyn's traps therefore work double duty. Obviously Zeri can't step on them, but that means that Zeri actually might miss CS because she can't get the angle for the shot she wants onto a low health caster minion because a trap is there and she can't step on that trap or Caitlyn is going to burst her down. Soraka as a champion is a little risky into Zeri, but having an on-demand instant silence can really mess with Zeri players because not only do you shut off her dash, but she also can't auto-attack either, right? Burst Fire is her auto-attack, but it's still technically an ability. If she can't press buttons, she can't auto-attack, and so it's a really funny way of just completely ruining her DPS in the middle of a fight. Obviously, it doesn't shut down her movement speed-based shenanigans. She can just walk out of the Equinox, for example, but it's still very potent, and I still think it's a good thing to have an on-demand silence to help deal with Zeri, and I think Soraka's is the most reliable of basically any champion left on the roster. Anyways, that is going to be it for me today, guys. Thank you all so very much for watching. Let me know what comments you have to counter Zeri with, if anything. If you guys have your own advice or your own opinions, let me know all that down in the comments. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave it a like. And if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.